My name is Sheryl Buckner. I'm 43 years old. I'm a bank teller in Tallow Creek, Illinois. And 6 weeks after we buried my mother, at the dinner our church put on in her name, my sister Melinda stood up in the middle of the fellowship hall with a stack of envelopes in her hand, gave me one with $2,000 in it, and told 60 people that if anybody was wondering where the rest of Mama's money went, they could ask the one of us who stands behind the glass. She was smiling when she said it. That's the part I need you to have. I was holding a paper plate with a piece of Miss Dorotha's ham on it, and I never did eat that ham. The hall had that church basement sound, forks and coffee and somebody's grandbaby fussing, and then it didn't have that sound anymore. Melinda let it go quiet. She's always known what quiet is worth. Then she looked around at the tables like she was checking whether the back row could hear her, and she said the rest of it. One of us stands behind that glass all day, she said. And it isn't me. 60 people who bank where I work. Otis Nunley at the second table with his hat in his lap. The woman who cashes her disability check at my window on the 3rd of every month. All of them looking at me the way you look at a car on the shoulder, trying to decide if you're supposed to stop. Nobody in that fellowship hall knew what was in my purse under my chair. It was a photocopy of a half-page form with my mother's name signed on it, and my sister had mailed it to me herself 3 weeks before, in her own hand, to make me stop asking questions. That form had been in my sister's hands since October, and in all that time she had never once looked at the bottom of it. Welcome back to Porch Stories, where the woman on the quiet side of the glass finally proves a signature wrong with the age of the paper it sits on. If somebody in your family has ever handed you a little bit of your own and called it a gift, in front of company, so you'd have to say thank you, then stay where you are tonight. Tell me in the comments what they made you say thank you for, because I'd like to know I'm not the only one it happened to. And subscribe, so you don't lose the porch. Before I can tell you what was at the bottom of that page, I have to start on a Friday afternoon with my mother's hands. I've stood at window 2 of the Pearly County Savings Bank in Tallow Creek, Illinois for 22 years, and I have never in my life handled a dollar that belonged to me. That's not me feeling sorry for myself. It's the arithmetic of the job. On a Good Friday, $40,000 or $50,000 crosses that marble counter and goes through my hands into the drawer and back out again. In payroll checks and gravel money, and the tens farmers keep folded in a shirt pocket, and not 1 cent of it has my name on it. My name goes on the counting. Here's what my day looks like. I get there at 7:40. I count my drawer before the door unlocks, and again at close, and it balances or I don't go home. That's not a figure of speech. 2 Novembers ago, I was there till 20 after 7 at night over 11 cents, and Garland Jetton, our branch manager, stood in the lobby in his coat and told me twice the bank would eat it. I told him I wouldn't. I found it in the coin bag on the second pass. I know this county by its money, which is a strange way to know people, but it's honest. Otis Nunley comes in every Friday at 10 after 9 with his fuel receipts in a rubber band and has me read his balance out loud, because he doesn't trust the slip the machine spits out and he trusts my voice. He's 84. He calls me young lady, and he brings pecans in October, in a feed sack, for the whole branch. I know Rita Dozier over at Cundiff Drug keeps a page of accounts in a spiral notebook for the people who can't cover a copay until the 3rd, and that she'd sooner die than say so out loud. And I know what it looks like when somebody's being talked into something at my counter. You see it more than you'd think. A grown child standing a half step too close, a hand on the back of a chair, a voice saying, "Just sign it, Mama. I already filled it out." I have watched it happen to other people's mothers 100 times, and every single time I did exactly what the rules say to do, which is nothing. That's the whole shape of this job. You see everything, you touch none of it. There's a picture in our lobby from the bank's 50th. A line of customers on a Friday afternoon. Big hair, everybody in coats. My mother, 3rd from the front, waiting her turn like anybody else, and me behind the glass with my head down, counting. Keep that picture handy. You'll want it later. My mother taught me that before the bank ever did. Norma Gann. She'd have been 77 this fall. Mama worked 31 years at the shoe factory in Harmon, on the line that set heels. and came home smelling like glue and rubber and never complained about it in my hearing. She raised Melinda and me on that and on a garden that ran the east side of the lot. Daddy died 9 years ago, Ivan Gann, who hauled gravel for the county and never once made it through a sermon without going to sleep, went down in the driveway on a Tuesday with the mail still in his hand, and after that it was just her out on Route T with the dog. She had bad hands even then. 31 years of setting heels had left her knuckles thick and crooked, and somewhere in her 50s a tremor came in on top of that, and she'd quit wearing her rings. She could still do everything. She just did it slower and with more swearing than a Baptist ought to. And she had a thing she said to me, and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. The week I started at the bank, I was 21, and she drove in on my first Friday and stood in the lobby in her good coat watching me count somebody's chicken money, and afterward, in the parking lot, she took hold of my wrist, not my hand, my wrist. "Keep your hands where people can see them," she said, "and you won't ever have to explain them." She wasn't being cute. Mama grew up poor in a house where things went missing and got blamed on whoever was standing closest, and she meant it the way you'd hand somebody a coat. There's a camera over my window and another one behind me, and I have never once minded them. Now let me tell you who's in my house, because it's a good house and I want you to see it before this gets ugly. My husband is Sheryl Buckner. He's 46, and he drives a wrecker out of Harmon, which means the phone goes off at 2 in the morning, and he puts his boots on in the dark and comes back at 4, smelling like diesel and cold. 19 years of that. He's got a bad shoulder from a winch cable, and he will not go to the doctor about it. Our boy is Bryce. He's 17, a junior, works Saturdays sweeping the pit at the Pearly County Farmer's Elevator, and has lately started leaving the house smelling like his father's aftershave, which I have decided not to mention. And there's Tater, who was Mama's dog, a fat, gray-muzzled thing of no particular breed who has slept on my porch since February, and who still, every single time a car turns in, gets up to see if it's her. Then there's my sister. It's easy to make Melinda into a cartoon, and she isn't one. Melinda Cagle is 48, 5 years up on me, and she's the one who stayed. That's the true part, and I'm saying it before I say anything else. When Mama's hands got bad, it was Melinda who drove her. When Mama broke her wrist, Melinda slept in the recliner beside her bed for 11 days. Melinda cut her toenails. Melinda washed her when she had an accident in the bathroom, and Mama cried about it, and Melinda told her to hush and got a clean gown. I was not there. I was at work. Melinda is also the one who told the whole county about it. That's not nothing either. She'd tell it at the beauty shop and in the church parking lot, the way you'd tell about a long trip, how she hadn't had a full night in a year, how somebody had to do it. And people would say, "Bless your heart, Melinda," and look around for the other daughter, and the other daughter was at window 2, 17 miles away, with a line to the door. Her husband is Barry Cagle. He had an excavating outfit, and it went under 2 winters back, and the backhoe got hauled out of their yard on a Thursday morning in front of God and everybody on Elm Street. Barry talks about the weather now, mostly. Their boy Braden is 22, works at the elevator with the men, and has his grandmother's exact laugh, and it still catches me sideways when I'm not braced for it. So that's the family. A tired man in a wrecker, a boy sweeping a pit, a dog waiting on a car, my sister who stayed and told everybody, and me who paid and told nobody. I have to explain that last part, because it matters more than anything else I'm going to say. Mama's propane came from Ivester gas, and a fill runs a little over $400, and she took 3 a winter in that drafty house, and for the last 5 years of her life, I paid every one of them at the counter in Harmon, in cash, on my lunch, because she'd have fought me about it if it went through the mail. Her medicine ran $61 a month at Cundiff Drug after the plan paid its part, and I picked it up and paid it and set it on her table and never said a word about the receipt. The ramp on the back steps at Melinda's, the one they put in after the wrist so Mama could get in and out of that house, that was $1,100 of lumber and 2 of Daryl's Saturdays. I never wrote down 1 nickel of it. 17 years balancing a drawer to the penny, A woman who once stood in a dark lobby over 11 cents, and I kept no record at all of what I gave my own mother. Keeping a record would have made it a debt, and it wasn't a debt, it was my mother. I'd give a good deal to have that back now. All right, the money. 4 springs ago, Mama decided on her own to sell the home place. 11 acres on Route T, the house, the pump house, the barn. Daddy never finished. She was 72 and couldn't do those stairs anymore, and she made that decision by herself at her own kitchen table and told us after it was done, which was exactly like her. She moved into a little rent house on Pine Street with a yard the size of a bedspread, and she was happy there. It brought $52,000, and on a Friday in April, my mother drove herself into Tallow Creek, parked in front of the bank, came in the front door in her good coat with a closing check in her purse, and got in line. Not my line. She stood in Haley's line. Haley Neighbors is 24 and had been with us about a year, and Mama went right to her because Mama knew the rule. I can't handle my own family's business at that counter. Not a deposit, not a balance, not so much as a roll of quarters. It's the first thing they tell you, and it's on a form you sign your first week. And the reason for it is standing in every one of these stories, including this one. So my mother stood 11 feet away from her own daughter with $52,000 in her purse and waited her turn. I had a man in front of me with a bag of quarters from the car wash, and I counted them. And out of the side of my eye, I watched Mama hand that check across the marble to a girl young enough to be her granddaughter, and sign the slip slow with that hand, pressing hard the way she had to. When Haley gave her the receipt, Mama looked back over her shoulder at me and winked. It's one of the last really good pictures I've got of her. Her in that coat, in my lobby, winking at me over a $52,000 deposit she made without any help from me at all. That money went into her savings account, the one she'd had since 1979. The one I'd been putting her $40 into every other Friday since I was in high school, back when I'd ride in with her, and she'd say, "Take this before I spend it on something foolish." With what she'd already built up in there, it came to $68,412.09. I know that number to the penny, and not because I looked, she told me. She had a little passbook the bank hasn't issued since before I was born, and she kept it in her purse in a rubber band and brought it in every so often to have it printed up. She showed it to me the last Sunday in January, the year she died, at my sister's kitchen table with the television going in the next room, and she put her thumb on the bottom line and said, "That's for you girls, and I don't want a word about it." And then she said the other thing she always said, "Both of you or neither one." She'd been saying that since we were little about everything from a candy bar to the cemetery plot. She'd already put it in writing. 9 years ago, after Daddy, Mama came in and filled out the bank's beneficiary form for that savings account and put both her daughters on it, half and half. That's not a will, and the difference is the whole story, and I'll get to it. But she did it. It's in the file. Both names, in her own hand, back when her hand still worked. Now I have to tell you about her hands going, and then I have to tell you about a Tuesday in October, and then you'll know everything I knew. The tremor got bad fast once she was in her 70s. It went from something you noticed when she poured coffee to something that made her stop having people over. Then in August, 2 years before she died, she fell on the back steps at the rent house taking scraps out to tater and broke her right wrist in 2 places. They put a plate in it in Harmon. It healed thick and stiff and slow, and after that she could hold a fork and she could not hold a pen. The difference matters, so I'll put it plain. She could make marks, she could not make her signature. Anybody who's watched an old person try knows what that looks like. It's harder to watch when you can't cross 11 feet of your own lobby to help, because that's what happened on the 14th of October, the year before she died. I was at window 2. It was a Tuesday, slow, maybe 2 people in the lobby. And the front door came open, and it was Melinda, holding it. And behind her came Mama with her purse on her good arm. I stood up. I had a customer, a fellow off the county road crew, and I stayed where I was because that's the job, but I stood up. And I said, "Hey, Mama," loud enough to cross the lobby, and she lit up and started over toward me. And Melinda put her hand on Mama's elbow and steered her to Garland's desk. "That's all. It's nothing. If you filmed it and played it back for a jury, they'd see a woman helping her mother to a chair." I finished with my county fellow and counted out his cash twice because my hands had gone stupid. The whole time, over at the desk with the plastic fern on it, my sister sat beside our mother with a folder and did the talking, and Mama nodded. And at one point, Melinda put her own hand over Mama's and held it there while Mama tried to write. I couldn't hear a word. People asked me later what I heard at that desk. Nothing. I was at my window with my back half to it, the way you are. What I knew that afternoon was one thing, and Haley told me, and she felt bad telling me. They'd done a mark card on Mama. That's what a bank does when a customer can't produce a signature anymore. A card goes in the file with their mark on it, an X usually. 2 officers witness it, and that's how they sign from then on. It's a kindness. It lets people keep their own money in their own name after their hand quits. Garland did it that afternoon, with Christy Waddy standing as the second. Haley said, "I'm sorry, Sheryl. She couldn't do it. She tried 3 times." And I went in the back and stood by the coin machine for a minute, and then I came back out and finished the day, and my drawer balanced. That's it. That's the whole thing I knew for the next 6 months. My mother couldn't sign her name anymore, and I found out from a 24-year-old, and I couldn't walk 11 feet to hold her arm while she tried. I didn't know about the other paper. Nobody did. A second thing went into my mother's file that same afternoon, at the same desk, out of the same folder, and it sat 11 inches from that mark card through the fall and the winter and my mother's whole funeral, and not one living soul ever laid the 2 of them side by side. Mama died on the 9th of February, in her sleep, at Melinda's house, where she'd been living since the wrist, her heart. She was 76. Melinda called me at 6 in the morning, crying so hard I couldn't understand her. And that was real. Whatever else you hear about my sister, my mother died in her house, and she loved her, and she was the one who found her. That's not the part that's a lie. The days after are a smear to me. Daryl drove. Bryce wore his father's tie. Aunt Lurline started calling from Arkansas twice a day, and Melinda handled everything, the way Melinda handles everything, and I let her, the way I always let her. 2 things happened that week, and I didn't know either one of them was a rung. The first was at Hobart's funeral home on the 10th. Kent Hobart sat us down in the room with tissue boxes on every surface, and Melinda started in about how we'd have to decide about cost, and how she'd take care of it, and how she'd been carrying everything anyway. And Kent Hobart cleared his throat and said, "Well now, Norma took care of most of this herself. Mama had a pre-need plan, bought 11 years ago, paid out over 3 years, casket and vault and the whole service, because she'd sat through a fight between 2 of her own cousins after their mother died and swore her girls would never do that. Kent had the papers right there in a green folder." Melinda said, "Oh." Then she said, "Well, she must have forgot to tell me," which was possible. And then she said the thing I heard and didn't hear, the way you do in that week. She said, "That's a relief, because there's not going to be much. Not going to be much." The second thing was Mama's purse. It came back to the house from the funeral home with her rings in an envelope, and Melinda had it, and she was going through it at the kitchen table. And I said, "Is her passbook in there?" And my sister said, without looking up, "I don't know what all's in here, Sheryl." And she zipped it and set it on the counter behind her. That's a small thing. I let 100 small things go that week. But I'd been standing at a counter for 22 years watching people's hands while they answer questions, and my sister's hand got to that zipper before her mouth got to the end of the sentence. I went home and shut the engine off in my own driveway and sat there a while, and then I went in and fed a dog that kept getting up to look at the door. If you've ever known a thing in your body a solid week before you'd let yourself know it in your head, you already know how that drive home felt. Tell me about yours down in the comments and what finally made you say it out loud. And subscribe, because the paper that ended this was mailed to me by the person it convicted, and she put the stamp on it herself. The first Saturday in March, Melinda came to my house with a folder. She was good that day. She brought a coffee cake. She sat at my table and talked about Mama's chair and who ought to have the quilt and whether I wanted to keep Tater. And then she slid a piece of paper across at me, the way you'd pass the sugar. It was an affidavit, small estate, heir's affidavit, the kind of thing you use in this state to move a car title and a few small things when there's not enough to open a real estate with a lawyer and a judge. Mama's Buick was in it, some household goods, a line for each daughter to sign, and a paragraph at the top that I read twice, because there's a sentence in those that people skim right over. It says you're swearing to it, under penalty of perjury. You're telling the court, in writing, what the whole estate is. I said, Melinda, what's in the account? And she said, there isn't an account. Flat. Like that. There isn't an account, Sheryl. Mama had her arrangements made, and that's all handled. All that's left is the car and her things. And Milford Pyle says, this is all we need. I said, the savings. The one at my bank. The one she showed me in January. Melinda said, that was hers to do with as she liked. And there it was. Not it got spent. Not there wasn't as much as you think. Hers to do with as she liked is a sentence a person says when they already know exactly where a thing went. I looked at my sister across my own table with a coffee cake between us and did the one thing that Counter has taught me. You don't argue. You don't accuse. You ask for the paper. I said, I'll sign anything you want, Rox. Show me a statement first. She got up. She said, so that's how it is. She said, I was over there every day for 2 years, and you're going to sit there and treat me like a customer. And I said, that's fair, and I still want to see a statement. She took her coffee cake and went out to her car. Left it, actually. Left the whole cake sitting on my table, which I think about. Now the question everybody asks, and I'll answer it once and then let it lie. Why didn't you just look? You work at the bank. Her account's at your bank. You could have pulled it up in 9 seconds. In 22 years, I have never typed my mother's name into that machine. Not once. Not when she was in the hospital in Harmon after the wrist, when I could have told her in 10 seconds whether her insurance had paid, and instead sat in that room while she called the number on the back of the card and waited on hold. It isn't that I'd have been caught, though every key I touch is logged with my number and the minute on it. It's that my mother stood in Haley's line with $52,000 in her purse because I'd asked her to 22 years ago, and she never once complained about it. Keep your hands where people can see them. So I did not look. In the middle of March, with Melinda not speaking to me and the whole business sitting in my chest like a rock, I did what any daughter can do. I got in my car on my lunch and drove to Harmon and walked into a bank that isn't mine. I'm not going to name it. I told the lady at the new accounts desk that my mother had died, that there was a savings account at another bank, and that I didn't know what happens to it. She was so kind to me, I had to look at the plant on her desk for a second. And she told me the thing that turned the world sideways, and it wasn't a secret. It's the plainest fact in banking, and almost nobody outside of it knows. She said, honey, if your mama had a beneficiary on that account, it never goes into her estate at all. It doesn't wait on a will, and it doesn't wait on a judge. Whoever's named on that card walks in with a death certificate, and it's theirs in about 10 minutes, and nobody has to tell you one thing about it. I sat in the lot afterward for a long while with the engine running, because I knew what was on that card 9 years ago, both names, half and half, filled out at my own bank in my mother's own hand. I'd have bet this house on it, which meant one of two things. Either my sister had gotten $34,000 in change and was sitting in front of me lying about a car title, or that card wasn't what it used to be. I asked Melinda one more time, by text, because we'd gotten to where the phone was a fight. I said, I'm not trying to fight with you. I'll sign the affidavit the day I see what happened to Mama's savings. She didn't answer for 4 days. Then on a Wednesday, there was an envelope in my box with her handwriting on it. 1 sheet of paper, a photocopy, folded in 3, with a sticky note in my sister's round schoolteacher hand. There, now sign it and quit. It was a copy of the bank's beneficiary form. Half a page. If you've never seen one, that's the thing I most want you to take away tonight. The paper that moves more money in this country than any will ever written is a half sheet with 4 lines on it. No notary, no witness, and nobody at any counter is required to ask you why. Account number. Name of the account holder, Norma Gann. 1 beneficiary line, and on it, in ink, Melinda Gann Cagle. 100%, and down at the bottom, on the signature line, my mother's name. I stood in my kitchen with my coat still on and looked at that signature for a long time. It was a good signature. It had her capital N with the little hook she put on it and the drop on the last part of Gann she'd been doing since she was a girl, and it sat on the line like it belonged there. Beside it, in the date box, somebody had written the 3rd of March, 2 years before she died. 5 months before the fall on the back steps. That's what stopped me. Not the signature. The date. Whoever picked that date, picked well. Pick one after the wrist, and anybody who watched my mother hold a pen has a question. Pick the 3rd of March, and she's a woman with a shaky hand who could still write her own name. There's no doctor to call, and no hospital record to pull, because nothing at all happened to my mother that day. It's a nothing day. Daryl was out on a call and Bryce was at a ball game. And I read it under the kitchen light the way I read anything, bottom to top, because the bottom of a page is where the trouble lives, and that's when I saw it. Down in the bottom left corner of that form, in gray type about the size of a gnat, there was a form number, and then a slash, and then a month and a year. Every blank form in that bank has a little line of gray type down in the corner that says which month they printed that batch, and a form can be signed on any day a person wants to write down, but it can't be signed before the paper it's printed on came into the world. The gray type on my sister's copy said June of the year before Mama died. That form is dated the 3rd of March, 2 years before my mother died. The paper it's printed on was made in June of the year after that. 15 months later. I know that because I unpack that box myself. I've ordered the forms at our branch for 11 years, the dullest job in the building, and I like it because it's mine. Twice a year, a box comes on the delivery truck, and I cut the band and fill the drawer under the new accounts desk, and the old blanks go through the shredder, because you cannot leave 2 versions of a form where somebody in a hurry might grab the wrong one. The June before Mama died, I cut a band on a box, I filled that drawer, and I shredded what was in there. So, on the 3rd of March, 15 months before that box existed, there was no such piece of paper in this county. Not in that drawer, not in Harmon, not anywhere. Whatever my mother signed or didn't sign that day, it was not that. I put both hands flat on my own table and I sat there, because I could see it now. All of it. The whole afternoon, from 11 feet away with a bag of car wash quarters in my hands. The 14th of October. My sister steering our mother past me to the desk by the plastic fern. The folder. Her hand over Mama's hand. Garland and Christy Waddy witnessing a mark card because my mother could not write her name. And in that same folder, on that same desk, in the same 20 minutes, a fresh blank out of that drawer, dated a year and a half back, over a signature my mother's hand had not been able to make since August. They went in the file together, one on top of the other, and there they sat. I did not sleep that night. I got furious, then ashamed of being furious about money at a time like that, then remembered it wasn't the money, and went around again. At about 4, I got up and made coffee, and decided 3 things, and I kept to all 3. 1. I was not going to call my sister a phone call at 4 in the morning as a conversation with no paper in it, and everything I said would be in Arkansas by noon in whatever shape she wanted it. 2. I was not going to touch it at work. Not the account, not the file, not the drawer, not one keystroke. 3. I had to find out if I was right about that gray type, and I had to do it from the outside, standing where any of you would be standing. The next Friday morning, Otis Nunley came in at 10 after 9 with his fuel receipts in a rubber band. I read him his balance out loud the way I always do. And while he was putting the rubber band back on, I said, "Mr. Nunley, you keep everything, don't you?" He said, "Young lady, I've got every piece of paper this bank ever handed me." I asked if he had a beneficiary form. He said he expected he did, on the account he set up when his wife passed, and he said it in a way that told me I'd have to sit at his table to get it, which was the point, and which he knew. So Saturday, I drove out with a coffee cake, since I had one, and we sat in his kitchen with a little radio going on the icebox while he went through a shoebox with a rubber band around it. 50 years of paper, in no order at all. And then, there it was. His beneficiary form, from the year his wife died, his own name and his daughter's, in his own careful print. Same form, same 4 lines, same little gray line of type in the bottom left corner. Different month, different year, 7 years older than mine. I sat at Otis Nunley's table and put the two of them side by side, and the gray type marched the way I knew it marched. Older on the left, newer on the right. He watched me do it and didn't ask. 84 years old, and he let me have my minute, and then he said, "That's about your mother, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And Otis Nunley said, "Well, Norma Gann counted out my chicken money at the mill when I was a young man, and never once made a mistake. And if you need me to say so in front of somebody, you tell me where to be." I have not cried much through any of this. I cried in that man's kitchen. He made me take his form. He put it in a grocery sack with a jar of pickled beets and walked me out to the car. From there it was 3 more stops, and none of them were at my bank. Kent Hobart printed me a copy of Mama's pre-need papers, because I'm her daughter, and it's her own contract. Casket, vault, service, opening and closing at Shiloh, finished 8 years back, signed when her hand still worked. It wasn't evidence of anything. It was a woman who knew her girls would be sitting in that room someday and paid for it 11 years ahead so we wouldn't have one thing to fight over. My sister had let a whole town believe she covered that funeral, and I could lay down a page that said Norma Gann covered it herself in 19 payments. Then the courthouse in Harmon, which anybody can walk into on their lunch hour. Nothing had been filed. No estate opened, no will presented, no letters. 6 weeks after my mother died, there was not one piece of paper about her in that courthouse. Which fits. If everything you wanted has already come to you outside the estate, the last thing you want is a judge and a docket and a lawyer mailing notices to the other heir. You want a little affidavit for a Buick. And then Rita Dozier at the counter at Cundiff Drug on a Tuesday. I'd gone in for Daryl's shoulder cream. Rita asked how I was holding up, and I said fine, and then I heard myself ask her something I hadn't planned. I said, "Rita, is there any way to know what I paid on Mama's account here?" And she said, "Well, sure, honey. It's your card. It's in the computer." And she turned the screen around. 2 years and 4 months of $61, and before that the antibiotics and the co-pays from the wrist. I said, "I didn't keep any of it." And Rita Dozier said the thing that put my back straight for the first time since February. She said, "You didn't keep it, sweetheart, but we did." That's the thing about giving quietly. I'd thought that because I never wrote it down, there was no record of me anywhere. There's one in the propane office in Harmon, in a spiral notebook at a drugstore counter, in the lumberyard's book from the spring of the ramp. It just isn't in my handwriting. I did not go collect any of it to defend myself, and when the day came that I could have used it, I still didn't reach for it. There's a difference between building a case and needing to know you're not crazy at 11 o'clock at night. By the last week of March, I had a photocopy from my sister, a form out of a shoebox with pickled beets on it, a funeral contract, and an empty courthouse. What I did not have was any way to see inside my mother's file, and I never would. And that's where most of these stories stop. So I did the thing that cost the most, 11 days before the dinner. And I did it in the order that would look right if anybody ever pulled the string. On the last Monday in March, at 7:40 in the morning, before I unlocked my drawer, I knocked on Garland Jetton's door and shut it behind me, and I said the sentence out loud. I said, "Garland, I need to report a suspected forgery on an account at this branch. It's my mother's account. The person I'm reporting is my sister. And I want to be taken off the line while it's looked at, today, and I want that in writing. Garland Jetton has run that branch 19 years, and I had never once seen the man's face do what it did. He sat down. He said, "Sheryl, hold on now." And then, to his credit, he did every single thing right. He did not open the file. He did not click one thing on his screen. He called corporate security with me sitting there, put it on speaker, and told them who I was, what I'd said, and that both parties were my family. The woman on the other end was Alma Holman. She has a voice like a filing cabinet closing. She said, "Miss Buckner, do not discuss this with anybody in that branch. Do not go into that file. Send me exactly what you have and nothing you don't, and date every piece and say who gave it to you." I did it that morning from Garland's office. The copy from my sister, the copy from Otis Nunley, and a page I typed saying what I saw on the 14th of October and what Haley told me, and saying plainly that I heard no conversation at that desk and was not a witness to what got signed. Then Garland walked me to the back and put me on the file cleanup they'd been meaning to do since 2 Christmases ago. Here's what that cost. In a town this size, a teller not at her window is a public event. By Wednesday, 2 customers had asked Haley where I was. By Friday, a lady I've known my whole life asked me at the gas pump if I was all right, in that voice. By the next week, Bryce came home and stood in the kitchen door and said, "Mom, Braden says his mom says you got in trouble at the bank." I said, "No, honey." I asked them to move me, and he said okay, and went to his room. And I stood there holding a dish towel and felt what that had already cost him at school that day. And Daryl, who does not say much, came in at 4 in the morning smelling like diesel and cold, sat on the end of the bed, put his hand on my ankle in the dark and said, "If it comes to it, we'll be fine." He'd already done the arithmetic on my paycheck being gone. He'd done it the first night and never mentioned it. I gave myself one night. I sat out on the porch after they were asleep with the dog and cried about an hour, over Mama mostly, over that lobby and the 11 feet. Then I washed my face, and I have not done it since, because that was the budget. Before the dinner, I owe my sister a paragraph, and I'll give it to her honestly. Melinda did not wake up one morning and decide to rob our mother. That is not how it happened, and pretending it is would let me off too easy. Barry's outfit went under 2 winters ago. That backhoe going down Elm Street on a Thursday morning is the kind of thing this county does not let a family forget. They had a second mortgage and a boy who'd started at the community college and quit. And in the middle of that, my sister was the one in the recliner beside our mother's bed at 3 in the morning for 11 days. She gave up things I did not give up. That's true, and it's going to stay true. And I think it started small. I think it started as $100 out of Mama's account for the light bill with every intention of putting it back, which is how it always starts. And I think somewhere in there she started telling herself a story about what she'd earned. She'd earned something. That part isn't even a lie. 2 years of nights is worth something, and nobody in this family ever offered her a nickel for it, including me. But there's a place where all that stops, and I know exactly where it is. It stops on the 14th of October, at a desk with a plastic fern on it, when a woman who could not write her own name anymore was walked past her own daughter and sat down in a chair. And somebody put a piece of paper in front of her that had been printed 4 months before and dated a year and a half before that. 2 years of nights doesn't reach that desk. Nothing reaches that desk. You can be owed and still be a thief. And my sister was both. And I'd have said that to her face any day she wanted to hear it. She never once asked me for anything. That's the part that I can't put down. If Melinda had come to me the week after Mama fell and said, "Sheryl, I'm drowning. I need you to help me," I'd have gone to the credit union in Harmon and signed for it. She knew that. That's why she didn't. The dinner came together the way those things do, over the phone, through Aunt Lurline. Mama was cremated. Her own idea and in her own contract, and she wanted her ashes in with Daddy at Shiloh. and the ground on that ridge is a mess until it dries. So we set it for the 11th of April, graveside at 11, and dinner in the fellowship hall after, the way our people do it. Miss Dorotha Shockley has made the ham for every funeral dinner at that church for 41 years. Melinda called me on the Tuesday before it, first time we'd talked in 5 weeks, and she was warm as toast. She said we ought to put our mess aside for Mama's Day, and I said I agreed with that. Then she said she'd bring the affidavit and we could sign it after, with everybody there, so it'd be done and behind us. With everybody there, so it'd be done. She was going to hand me a pen in a room full of the people I count money for on the day we buried our mother, and if I didn't take it, I'd be the sister who made a scene at a funeral dinner. And I said, "That's fine, Rox. I'll be there." I'm proud of this next part, and it would be easy to make it sound like something it wasn't. I did not plan one thing that happened in that hall. I didn't call one soul. Every person there was already coming. I never told Otis Nunley, or Rita Dozier, or Miss Dorotha, or my own husband what was in my purse. Alma Hallman had told me not to discuss it, and for 11 days I hadn't, with anybody. My sister picked that room. My sister picked that day. My sister mailed me the paper, and my sister decided to stand up in front of 60 people and hand out envelopes. All I did was put my purse under my chair. Before I take you into that hall, one thing. 11 days, I knew a thing about my own sister and was not allowed to say it to a living soul. If you've ever had to be pleasant to somebody while you were carrying what you knew about them, you already understand the next 20 minutes. Say so in the comments and tell me what it did to your sleep. And stay with me, because my sister is about to stand up with a stack of envelopes. The 11th of April came up gray and windy and turned nice by noon, the way April does here when it's deciding to be spring. Graveside at Shiloh was 11 minutes. Brother Rayfield said what he had to say, and the wind took most of it, and Aunt Lurline held my arm going back down the hill, and Braden carried the little box for his grandmother, and Melinda cried and I cried. Whatever else that day turned into, my sister and I stood on the same piece of dirt and cried over the same woman, and then we drove 8 miles to a church basement. Pilgrim's Rest's Fellowship Hall has fluorescent lights and a serving window and 11 long tables with plastic cloths on them. Miss Dorotha had the ham, green beans out of somebody's freezer, rolls, and 4 kinds of pie on the end table, and she does not let anybody help her carve. They'd set up a memory table by the door. School pictures of Melinda and me, Mama and Daddy on the church steps, Mama at the shoe factory picnic, and the one from the bank's 50th, the line of customers. Mama, third from the front in her good coat, me behind the glass with my head down, counting. Somebody had brought her copy of it from her hallway wall and put it in a frame with a ribbon on it. We ate. It was good. Otis Nunley had his hat in his lap at the second table. Rita Dozier came straight from the store in her smock. Haley came, which I did not expect, and 60 people got through Miss Dorotha's ham and started in on pie. And then my sister stood up. She'd dressed careful. She thanked the church. She thanked Miss Dorotha by name, and the hall clapped, which was right. She said some true, good things about our mother, and one of them made Braden put his head down. And then she picked up a stack of envelopes off the table beside her. She said, "I know everybody's wondered how Mama left things." She said, "The truth is, there wasn't much. Mama had her expenses these last years, and I've handled all of it, and I'm not going to stand here and go into it at a dinner." Then she started handing envelopes out, one to Aunt Lurline, who took it like it was hot, one to the church for the memorial fund, which got an amen from 2 tables. Then she came down the row to me with the last one, put it in my hand in front of everybody, and closed my fingers on it. She said, "That's for you, Sheryl. 2,000. It's what there is." And then she stayed standing beside my chair, which is when I understood she wasn't finished, and she got a folder out from under the envelopes and laid the affidavit on the tablecloth by my plate with a pen on top of it. She said, "And if you'll sign this, we can be done and let Mama rest." 60 people. Pie forks stopped. I said, quiet, just to her, "I'm not going to do this today. and my sister looked up and out at the room and raised her voice a half step, and she said it. She said, "I've kept my mouth shut about a lot of things, but I'll say this much. Mama's money was handled the way Mama wanted it handled. And if anybody's got a question about where it went, one of us stands behind that glass all day, and it isn't me." And then, into that quiet, the thing she'd been saving, she said, "There's a reason she hasn't been at her window for 2 weeks. Ask her that." All right. What went through me at that table was not rage. I'd always thought if somebody said a thing like that to me in front of a room, my ears would ring. They didn't. I went calm and slow, the way you do when a man walks up to your window with his hand still in his coat. I set the envelope down on the table. I did not open it. I said, "Melinda, I'm going to answer both of those, and then I'd like you to sit down." I stood up because I wanted the back tables to hear it once and not have it carried out of there wrong. I said, 11 days ago I walked into Garland Jetton's office at 7:40 in the morning, before I unlocked my drawer, and told him I needed to report a suspected forgery on an account at that bank. I told him the account was my mother's. I told him the person I was reporting was my sister, and I asked him to take me off the line that same day, in writing, so nobody in this county could ever stand up in a room and say what you just said. I said, "That's why I'm not at my window," and I said, "Every key I touch on that machine is recorded with my number, and the date, and the minute. I asked them to pull mine and read it back to the year I was hired. You can ask them for it. I already did." Then I got my purse off the floor. My hands were steady. Not because I'm brave, because I have counted money in front of strangers for 22 years, and my hands do not shake at a counter. I took out my sister's envelope with her handwriting on the front of it, took out the copy she'd sent, and laid it on the tablecloth. I said, "Melinda mailed me this 3 weeks ago," her hand on the envelope. "It's Mama's beneficiary form for her savings account. It's got one name on it, and it's dated the 3rd of March. Then I laid the second one down beside it and said, "And this one is Mr. Otis Nunley's, out of his own kitchen, and he gave it to me himself last Saturday." Otis Nunley stood up at the second table with his hat still in his hand and said, "That's mine, and I give it to her. And she didn't ask me for it neither. She asked if I kept things." I said, "Look at the bottom left corner of both of them." Nobody could see it from where they sat. It didn't matter. I read it out. I said, "Every blank form in that bank has a little line of gray type down in the corner that says which month they printed that batch, and a form can be signed on any day a person wants to write down. But it can't be signed before the paper it's printed on came into the world." I said, "Mr. Nunley's says the year his wife died. Mine says June, the year before Mama died." I said, "The signature on my mother's is dated the 3rd of March, 15 months before that." And then I told that room the part I'd been carrying by myself since a Wednesday in March. I said, "I order the forms at our branch, and I've done it 11 years. That June I cut the band on that box myself and filled the drawer and ran the old ones through the shredder, because you can't leave 2 versions of a form where somebody in a hurry might grab the wrong one. On the 3rd of March, 15 months before that, there was no such piece of paper in Pearly County. Somebody at the back table said, 'Oh my Lord,' out loud, and I said the last of it to my sister and not to the room. I said, "On the 14th of October, you brought Mama in the front door, and I stood up at my window and said, 'Hey, Mama,' and you took her elbow and walked her past me to Garland's desk. That afternoon, Garland and Christy Waddy put a mark card in our mother's file because she couldn't write her name. She tried 3 times. Haley had to tell me because I'm not allowed to cross that lobby." I said, "That mark card and that form went into the same file the same afternoon, 11 inches apart, and there is no day on God's earth when both of those things are true." My sister went through it in about 90 seconds. I've thought about that since. First, she cried. Real crying, and I don't believe it was fake. People expect the tears to be the performance. In my experience, they're the only honest thing left in the room. She said, "You were not in that house at night." She said, "I was the one that got up." She said, "I wiped her, Sheryl. Where were you?" Then she went past me to the room, which is the second thing they do, she said. My sister has always been the one that counts. Ask her husband what she's like about $1. And then, when the room didn't come with her, she got to the third one. She pulled herself straight and said it the way our grandmother used to say things. She said, I am the oldest. Mama put me in charge of everything at the end, and that was her wish, and none of you were in that house. And that's when Aunt Lurline stood up. Aunt Lurline is 79 and drove up from Arkansas, and she was still holding that envelope. And she said, in a voice like a screen door, Melinda Gann, your mother said one thing to you girls your whole lives, and I heard her say it 100 times, both of you or neither one. Then Rita Dozier said it into the room from the third table, without standing up, the way you'd correct somebody about a phone number. She said, Cheryl's paid Norma's medicine at my counter every month for 2 years and 4 months. It's on the account. I'll print it for anybody that wants it. And my sister sat down on the folding chair behind her like her legs quit. There wasn't any shouting. There's never any shouting in this county. 60 people at 11 tables looking at plastic tablecloths, and Miss Dortha came out from behind the serving window with a cup of coffee, set it by my plate, laid her hand between my shoulder blades for a second, and went back to her ham. That's what people here do, instead of saying something. I picked up my 2 pieces of paper and put them in my purse. I left the affidavit where it was and the envelope on the table beside it, and I have never opened it. It's still sealed in my sock drawer with her handwriting on the front. I went to the memory table and took my mother's picture out of the frame with the ribbon on it. Her third from the front in her good coat. Me behind the glass with my head down. At the door, I stopped by my sister's chair. I didn't lean down. I said it plain, the way our mother said it to me in a parking lot when I was 21. I said, keep your hands where people can see them, and I went out to the car where Daryl had already pulled around. After that, it moved the way things move once there's paper behind them. Nothing at all for days, and then everything in 1 week. Alma Hallman called me Monday morning at 10 till 8. She never says hello. She said, Miss Buckner, I'm going to read you something. The bank had pulled my mother's file over the weekend. 2 documents accepted at the Tallow Creek branch on the 14th of October. A signature card bearing the mark of Norma J. Gann, witnessed by 2 officers, and a change of beneficiary form bearing her full signature, dated the 3rd of March of the prior year. Printed on stock, the bank first distributed that June. She read me the form number and the revision line off the bottom of it, and I stood in my own kitchen and said them out loud with her like a woman saying the pledge. Christy Waddy did not remember it, and I believe her. She floats 3 branches. It was a Tuesday, and a daughter handed her a folder with 2 things in it that both had a name on them she'd seen 1,000 times. That's all it ever takes. The money had gone out on the 21st of February, 12 days after Mama died, at the Harmon branch, with a certified copy of the death certificate. $68,412.09 paid to the named beneficiary in about 10 minutes, exactly the way that lady in Harmon said it would be. $19,000 of it went to the second mortgage. The rest went the way money goes in a house that's behind. The bank made the estate whole in June, because that form should never have been accepted, and they know it. Their lawyers and my sister's lawyer will be at each other for years, and I'm not part of that. The prosecutor in Harmon charged forgery. In August, my sister pled to it. Probation, restitution on a schedule that will outlast her 50s. No jail, and I did not ask for jail. When the victim advocate called, I said the only thing I wanted was for the money to go where our mother put it. Milford Pyle opened a real estate in September, the way it should have been opened, in February. It took a judge about 4 minutes. Half and half. Both of us, or neither one. My mother said it about candy bars and cemetery plots, and she got it in the end out of a courthouse in Harmon, 22 years after she started saying it. Alma Hallman's report had 1 line about me, and Garland read it to me before he put me back on the line. No access to that account by that employee number, ever, in the entire retained history of the system. 17 years. Not one time. I got my window back the first Monday in May. Haley had put a jar of pens on it and a note that said, "Welcome back" in block letters. And Otis Nunley came in that Friday at 10 after 9 with his fuel receipts in a rubber band. It's September now. Tater still gets up when a car turns in. He's slower about it. He sleeps most of the day on the boards where the sun comes across at 2 o'clock, and Bryce has started letting him in the house, which he thinks I don't know about. Braden came by in July. He stood in my driveway with his hands in his pockets a good 10 minutes before he'd come up on the porch. He said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, Aunt Sheryl." I told him he's supposed to love his mother and he's supposed to come see me, and both of those are allowed. Nobody says a word about his mother in front of him in my house, and that's going to hold. Melinda sent me a long message in July, 4 screens of it. I read it sitting in my car outside the elevator waiting on Bryce, then laid the phone screen down in the cup holder and watched a man load feed sacks for a while. I have not written her back. I won't tell you I never will. My sister is going to have to be somebody different from the woman in that hall before I'd know what to put, and there's no hurrying that. Aunt Lurline calls on Sundays after church and tells me about Arkansas. The picture from the bank's 50th hangs in my hallway now. Everybody looks at the same part, the line, the coats, the 80s haircuts. I look at the corner. My mother, third from the front, waiting her turn like everybody else, in a lobby where her own daughter worked, because that's what she thought was right, and nobody ever had to tell her twice. I used to think Mama was telling me how to stay out of trouble that day in the parking lot. Now I know she was telling me how to be a woman a room doesn't have to wonder about. That's my story. A half sheet of paper with gray type at the bottom of it, a shoebox in an old man's kitchen, and a mark card that sat 11 inches from a lie all winter in a drawer nobody ever opened. If your mother or your daddy has an account anywhere, ask them this week, out loud, with your brothers and sisters standing right there, whose name is on the beneficiary card. Not the will, the card. The will can say anything you like, and that card will beat it to the money. And if anybody hands you a form to sign, look at the bottom left corner before you look at the top. If you know a woman who did all the paying and none of the telling, and her family has decided she's the one to watch, send her this one tonight. Tell me in the comments who does the paper in your family, and whether anybody's ever shown you a statement. And subscribe, because there's a lot of us out here on the quiet side of the glass. That's all of it. Thank you for sitting with me on the porch tonight. I'll see you in the next one.